Rings of Power is not Tolkien, a seemingly charged statement, a definitive one at that, yet I chose to begin this video by these very words. Well, it should not be viewed as some powerful commentary on the state of the show, as it is a simple fact. While some elements of the lore that Tolkien wrote can be found within, there's plenty of newly added characters, deviations from major or minor events, world-building differences, all originating from the minds of those who worked on it. Let's take this thought one step further. The Jackson trilogy is not Tolkien either. Not only did it make some alterations, it is fundamentally a different medium of storytelling, and the aforementioned professor provided nothing but the source material. I would not call anything he has not worked on or gave his blessing for actually Tolkien. Rings of Power is not Tolkien, and that is okay, as something can be good or bad regardless of who made it, just like how a faithful adaptation can be horrible while a loose one might be brilliant. I chose this sentence as my opening statement to set the tone. Faithfulness has no bearing on quality. Therefore, while I am not entirely unfamiliar with the lore the show is based on, I will not compare the two canons, as there is little reason to do so. Rings of Power will be evaluated based on its own merits, or lack thereof. I am also a firm believer of death of the author, a notion that even the creator of a piece of art can be wrong about it, have an incorrect interpretation, or claim to have created something that cannot be found in the work itself. Essentially, an author's meta-input, while potentially very interesting, should not be taken into account when determining the qualities of what they've made. Rings of Power will definitely benefit from this approach, as the showrunners routinely open their mouths like a spillway on a dam and spew out nonsense and accusations like pyroclastic flow from a volcano. There's enough material for us here anyway.
Give me the meat, and give it to me raw.
So, having distanced ourselves from the peripheral shitstorm surrounding the show, let's take a look at what's within the 8+ hours of content. Not every little detail, obviously, I do wish to work on other stuff in this lifetime, but the important things, and what nonsense I find interesting. Like agriculture and creature design. Naturally, I'll keep my biases and opinions out of the evaluation itself and merely present them as what they are. You might have also noticed the Part 1 in the title. Well, this one kinda sprawled out of hand, and since I do this in my free time, I had to separate it for my own convenience and sanity. Part 2 will be coming shortly after, I hope. But enough of the introduction, we have quite a large video ahead, so let's begin. Can we skip the boring-ass intro? Hang on a second, with so many characters, plotlines, factions and lore snippets, where should we even begin? Definitely not chronologically, as the constant switching between the various locations and storylines would divide our attention, making it more difficult to keep track of consistency. A tactic the creators have purposefully or inadvertently used, I might add. Oh, I know. Let's start with the more expository topics, like the various sapient species and factions of the setting. Who better to tackle first than the prominently featured elves? A common fantasy race popularized by Tolkien himself, but what are they here really? Well, they are like humans, but with long lives, pointy ears and magic. This might seem like a superficial distinction, but they really are not that different from mortals, including their attitudes, motivations and knowledge. You might think hundreds if not thousands of years of existence might shape one's perception and reasoning, but, well, let's just go through it with material from the show to back everything up. Elves hail from the mystical continent of Valinor. It is, well, it's a good bit of land. We do not see much of it, but it presumably has various biomes, its own wildlife. We can even spot some settlements. We see elves eat, create buildings and clothes to protect themselves from the elements. They even fight each other, although the outcome was apparently never lethal. So this very much seems just like any old protrusion from the sea, only it is more difficult to get to. Plus, there were these two trees for a time, but we'll get back to that a bit later. Either way, while the elves do not die of old age, they can be killed. It is odd that nothing ever in their unspecified years of existence threatened a single one of them, despite their capacity for violence, but I digress. They did not need the word for death. Not impossible, just unlikely beyond reason. Their incredible healing factor may have something to do with it, even if it cannot explain how lethal wounds weren't a thing.
Are there healers among your kind?
There are, but we call them artificers.
Most wounds to our bodies heal of their own accord.
Indeed, elves regenerate damage to their body at such an efficient rate and consistency that they have no healers, only artificers, artists who heal the soul, or rather the psychological toll life has on one's mind.
It is their labor instead to render hidden truths as works of beauty. For beauty has great power to heal the soul.
We learned this in the very first episode, even though the existence of elven healers is a crucial plot point in the last 2 entries of the series. But I guess they kinda forgot this bit of dialogue. In episode 7, a wound of one of the main characters, who is Sauron by the way, is deemed so severe that it needs elven medicine.
This wound needs elvish medicine.
Something that just so happens to be available in a location where other main characters are, so that the show can speedrun the creation of 3 rings in the next episode. How convenient. If only this conversation didn't establish that as an impossibility. Either that, or Arondir here is lying to flex with the incredible biology of elves in front of her. Oh, we'll get to you too. Massive worldbuilding, or alternatively character issue aside, the first casualties of elves apparently come from the war against Morgoth, a sort of evil god pulled from Tolkien lore. Threatening their idyllic life and taking over parts of the world, the elves skip a few thousand years of development in terms of military technology and forge tools of war. I'm being half facetious here. It is perfectly plausible that their gods, the Valar, gifted them the knowledge of their creation, keeping them at the medieval level so that they do not become too powerful. I'm really still manning here, but without further information, this seems like the most viable explanation. This is further supported by the fact that elves seem like particularly shit fighters, as if they were simply given the object to fight with, but not the skill or experience to use them. We can see them just swinging those blades like baseball bats. Oh, there we go, an orc stepped right through the armor. Glad to see yet another piece of media where protective gear is just for show. Elves being terrible soldiers is again underlined by the scene where a whole party is attacked by a troll. The elves just stand around and flail inanely while the beast takes them out with ease. There are some, or rather 2, that the show tries to show as extremely competent, but it really fails even then. Galadriel has a few scenes where we are supposed to think she's an awesome warrior, but her enemies generally just stand around, use strongly telegraphed swings in her general direction, often not even aiming at her, and are usually unskilled, or in the case of the troll, a wild beast. She wins her fights with ease, and at no point do we see her take on an opponent of supposedly equal skill. She is good because we are told she is, not based on what she does. Arondir is a bit better in this regard. He has inhuman accuracy with the bow, which we can chalk up as skill. He can stand his own against orcs one-on-one, but actually putting in effort instead of faffing about with a smug look on his face. On the other hand, we do have unnecessary flashy moves like his jumping around or catching an arrow mid-flight, which do not communicate professional skill but rather a need to show off. He also has an interesting ability, which we will discuss later. All in all, he's a mixed bag, showing actual skill in some aspects, while also not being above blocking a punch with his face. Not exactly screaming superhuman capabilities there. Conclusion, elves are not innately better fighters than humans. Not that the humans of this setting seem particularly skillful. Either way, the orcs and other servants of Morgoth were apparently even worse than the elves, who won the war and killed the god. It took them centuries.
But the war left Middle-earth in ruin, and would last centuries.
And then spent a couple more scouring the lands for the remnants of the enemy.
But the trail grew thin. Year gave way to year. Century gave way to century.
Centuries are a really long time, but we have no concept of what actually transpired in the meantime, or what everything really was like before, so I will have to let this one go. I mean, the elves did not improve their military gear, but if they were so helpless they had to be given the information how to forge weapons, I guess it is consistent that they have no clue how to improve. Remember, they were fighting for centuries, they had every reason to develop their tools of war if nothing else, but I guess they were not capable of that. I mean, their collective knowledge has some significant gaps. For example, they struggle with the idea of basic metallurgy.
Couldn't the right alloy also amplify those qualities? Amplify?
This is a millennia-old smith, by the way. I guess everything they've ever produced was a result of divine intervention. All in all, not an impossibility, but whichever explanation we use kind of diminishes the intelligence and or agency of the elven race. Now, to be completely fair, there is a notion hinted about 2 times that time flies fast for elves.
20 years may be the blink of an eye to an elf.
20 years is nothing for them. While I will argue that Aaron is simply a slimy weasel of a friend, let me debunk this idea here and now. By what we see in the show, with every scene concerning the elves, every event, conversation, action, they do not experience the passage of time in any way different. Mortals are not in fast-forward mode for them. They do not talk or move slow. In fact, they often seem more energetic and snappier.
There is a tempest in me!
A second for a human is a second for an elf. A day for an orc is a day for an elf. 20 years for a dwarf are 20 years for Aaron too. Don't make up excuses for him, Durin, he will only cause you more pain. Still, this is not the only example of time not making any sense in the show, and based on what they attempt to present the elves as, this is more likely to be an oversight, a mistake rooted in their, in my opinion, incorrect read of the source material, something I promised not to get into. What else can be known of these prominent people? Well, they are losing their immortality. The light of the Bhxr is leaving them, meaning that they would wither and die if they do not return to Valinor. Now, one could make the educated guess that this is not a coincidence. This is not just a force of nature acting up. No, this is more than likely the gods themselves trying to tell the elves that it is time they fuck off and leave Middle-earth on its own. An idea that is kind of touched upon by the Dwarven King.
The fate of the elves was decided many ages ago by minds much wiser, much farther seeing than our own.
But is not given nearly the recognition it should. Gil-galad, the Elven King, might be responsible for the brainwashing of those precious few who know of the issue, presenting it as an obstacle to overcome rather than divine warning.
If the elves abandon Middle-earth now, armies of darkness will march over the face of the earth. It will be the end not just of our people, but all peoples.
If he truly pursues this goal to ensure Middle-earth is protected from the encroaching evil of the couple hundred orcs in the Southlands, his efforts could be commended. However, if Durin is to be believed, the elves are expanding, establishing more and more colonies.
I might task the same of London. Shipping off its warriors, expanding its cities.
It would be an unfortunate reality if Gil-galad would have to leave all this conquered land, lush fields, rich forests, and bustling cities, give up his crown, power, and most of the influence gathered over the centuries. A hard-fought kingdom. His reluctance to give their last-ditch effort to counteract the affliction might be a subtle nod at him realizing his own hubris.
Our time runs short.
Yes, that is why.
Shorter than you know.
You are hereby commanded to disband the city and return to Lindon immediately.
Which would also explain why Aaron's terribly presented proposition sways his mind.
I am sorry.
Grant me 3 months. I am owed that much.
You are owed nothing.
Then do it not out of recompense. Do it because I asked you.
Do I really believe that this is the case? Do I think that Gil-galad is conspiring against the gods to keep his fiefdoms? No, not really. It is an interesting idea, which would give his rather plain character some much needed depth. But based on how this show generally operates, we should take what we see and are told at face value. The red herrings and upcoming plot twists are always obvious. Case in point, Sauron's identity.
Looks can be deceiving.
What is subtlety anyway? What this means is that trees rotting because of one or more elves did something bad, became corrupted, and the gods just don't fancy them that much anymore. Hence they are desperately scrambling to cut out what traces of evil they might harbor, or find a band-aid solution. More on the insanity of their plot to achieve that later. The elves are also capable of magic. We do not really get a good idea of what the extent of these powers are. Beside the healing bit, all we see is a spell to make a horse a bit faster and one to make a paper boat more cringe. What else is there? Well, they really like trees.
This tree sprang from the earth long before you crawled from whatever wretched place you grew. It has earned its place!
They also have some nature-oriented customs, like planting seeds before a battle or carving the dead into wood. Those are things, even if only briefly featured. To be honest, we never get a deep look at elven culture, which is not necessarily a problem, but it does make them seem rather generic and bland, which is odd in light of the screen time they get and their importance in the story. Well, we still have factions to take a look at, see what separate groups of elves do, their motivations, relationships with other people, stuff like that. Let's see. Well, there's Linden, the capital. It's not really a faction though, we barely see anything going on there. A council is mentioned, but we never see it. Gil-galad has a meeting with Durin, but they just clumsily insult each other. Then the dwarf just tricks him out of a table. What a shrewd diplomat he is. There's the tree with the rot, but we don't see anyone actually studying or trying to heal it. Most characters here are just nameless nobodies without a voice. We don't know what the city wants, what they fear, or what they aspire to do. Is Gil-galad the beloved king? Is he hated? We know nothing, so there is nothing to speak of really. Let's move on, maybe we have more luck with Eregion. This city is known for its smiths and craftsmen, home to Celebrimbor, the surprisingly incompetent master artificer, who is coincidentally the only named inhabitant. The elves here, despite working with Caleb, do nothing more than menial tasks. They also have their convenient healer squad. Gil-galad and Caleb wish to, and eventually build a presumably magical forge here, practically in an afternoon, as a fraction of a scene is dedicated to show us the procedure. This is a greater issue I see crop up more and more in modern media. A reluctance to show the journey and instead just rush through plot points as quickly as they can, without making the obvious comparison here. Scenes where we take time with characters in the process of achieving their goals, when working towards or against something, and interact with each other as well as the world, are prime opportunities to really build them. Endear them to the audience, make them understand their motivations at play, inspire sympathy or antipathy. A story needs moments that put everything in perspective. Plying through major events without actually knowing the characters will inspire nothing but apathy. Most of the people in the series suffer from this issue. They are thin and underdeveloped, juggling a few traits at most and lacking any semblance of nuance. While not technically characters, as they are elements of world building, locations and factions can suffer the same fate. Eregion is a set piece where the rings are forged, nothing more. It is so interchangeable with Linden that I sometimes forgot which city a particular scene is taking place. But I digress, as there is a third, if rather minor elven faction that is quite distinct, the Elves of Ostirith, a watchtower overlooking a segment of the Southlands. Without getting ahead of myself and detailing the region, it is essentially home to people who fought on the wrong side of the war back in the day. The elves erected a number of watchtowers to ensure that the population remains subdued. They don't want them to have any sort of power, as they believe that the local humans are innately drawn to evil.
It has changed much, Watchward.
But the men who live here have not. The blood of those who stood with Morgoth still darkens their veins. That for 79 years you've kept watch over the men and women of Tirharad, not because of what their ancestors once did, but because of who they still are.
Yes, the elves of Osterith are a rather racist bunch, for the most part anyway. The tensions go both ways though, and a sizable portion of the two peoples despises the other side.
Oh, let it go, knife is!
To be fair, the elven flavor of the racism does not go further than being highly suspicious and not engaging with the locals, as they hold relatively little authority. We only see one of them, our main character Rondir, interact with the peasants. It probably has something to do with the fact that he has a romantic interest among the populace who periodically shows similar feelings. A relationship most take issue with.
Only twice in known history has a pairing between elves and humans even been attempted, and on each occasion it ended in tragedy.
This is not it though. There is one more general characteristic of this faction. They are dog shit at their one job. The orcs manage to deforest large areas, dig a massive trench with a spawning underground network, raid entire towns with not a soul escaping, and obtain a small army of slaves to do the heavy labor for them in a land that the elves were supposedly surveying. Just to drive the point home, they missed this. It's no surprise the orcs could just capture all of them. There is also the odd fact that all watchtowers are decommissioned by Gil-galad in the very first episode.
The High King has declared the days of war are over.
All the 4 outposts are being disbanded. We're leaving.
This is at a time when he knows that orcs are still out there, but I guess to legitimize his declaration of peace, which is a ploy to get Galadriel to fuck off because he believes that her insanity is causing the tree to rot. Yeah, I know this is a bit complicated in a proper context. So, Gil-galad issues peace because the war is over. Galadriel, who we will discuss later, is a ruthless, single-minded, unbearable person who wants nothing but to hunt down and murder orcs, regardless of what it takes. Gil thinks that the tree rot originates from her inner corruption, her evil, so his plan is to send all orc hunters to go back to Valinor on the excuse that there is nothing left to hunt.
Galadriel was so certain her search should continue. We foresaw that if it had, she might have inadvertently kept alive the very evil she sought to defeat. We hoped that by sending her away and so bringing an end to the last vestiges of war, we might arrest the decay.
Now we are later informed that he does indeed know that orcs are still out there.
Then the shadow she sought. You believe it does exist?
Set your mind at peace about it. Armies of darkness will march over the face of the earth. It will be the end not just of our people, but all peoples.
Their numbers are meager, that is true, and do not really pose any real threat with elven outposts dotting the lands. It is a bafflingly stupid decision to just disband the soldiers standing guard, but it is even more insane that zero fucks are given that one outpost does not make it back to the capital at all. They are wiped save for a single elf, and also happen to have been stationed where a fucking volcano exploded, but I guess their contracts ended, so who cares? I mean the king, Elrond, Celebrimbor, any of the dwarves, they don't even comment on Mount Doom casually creating a perpetual smokescreen a few days' ride from one of their major cities. Did they not notice? Then why didn't Galadriel tell them? Mordor popping out of the woodworks is probably something that is worth mentioning. It is so easy to get sidetracked with this show. Anyway, the Wardens of Osterith are disbanded for no good reason. It is utterly pointless even narratively, since they all get captured anyway. All it does is give motivation for Rondir to seek out his crush at a plot-critical moment. Him approaching her without being prompted by such a massive event would still work and make this less of a coincidence. And this is a big one, believe me. Rondir gets news of being recalled, which causes him to go to the herbalist, right before Leathercap here decides to bring his Starfield cow to her in hopes of a cure.
What was that? Squirted out of it.
a cow which grazed on a field which just so happened to be in the direction of a town the orcs ransacked, which as a result is found by our elf and his lover, so soon after the incident that fires are still burning, but not early enough for any straggling orcs to be around. The more coincidences are strewn together to make a plot function, the less believable it becomes. Removing the initial one would do nothing but improve it, not absolve it of all its issues, but still. To be completely fair, it is also reason for the peasants to not suspect anything funny when the elves disappear, but that fact only facilitates this horrific scene involving an incompetent weaponless orc, an angsty teen, and this piece of shit. Oops, I got ahead of myself. The herbalist. The peasants would in either case end up in the watchtower, which is the last thing I want to mention about the Osterith quote-unquote faction. We do not get a clear idea of who exactly built it. It is at numerous times referred to as the Elven Watchtower, but it might simply refer to the inhabitants. The top piece also suggests their handiwork, as does this odd ladder, but the rest clash with those visuals. Its walls are shoddy, weathered, and the tower itself is kept upright with this strange contraption which does not seem elven, but is seemingly too new to have been made by Morgoth's forces. Still, that does seem like the only explanation, as it has something rather special hidden within. Now do remember that the elves held this position potentially for centuries, going by what Arondir said, at least 79 years.
79 years I've been stationed here.
Yet they failed to thoroughly inspect a mural on its walls that describes how a sword-shaped key is used to activate a mechanism. A mechanism with a rather obvious keyhole right under the mural. They did not try to investigate it, disable it, fill up the keyhole with something, demolish it to build something else that does not have the chance to kill them all. No, they just left it there. They had 79 years to prevent this. Yes, the mechanism has the very evil purpose of opening the spillway on the dam. Kind of an odd way to adjust water levels, but that is not the full purpose, as I've already said. We'll discuss the asinine nature of that separately though. So the elves did not come out great after our little inspection. Who should we scrutinize next? Well, the dwarves seem like a fine contrast, as they are probably the most intact by the end of this series. Dwarves are short and stout, spending most of their time underground, looking for precious ores and high-quality building materials. The only city of theirs we see is Khazad-dûm, but it is one that I definitely do not hate. We can see light seeping in from above, which is redirected with massive mirrors to illuminate living quarters and plazas. We can even see vegetation, water sources, a glimpse at agriculture. Although I do question how they got this cart up and down all those stairs. They might have an accessibility problem in this regard, especially if we take into account the narrow passageways. I'm also not a fan of no railings. Probably many dwarves, especially children, fall to their deaths here. There is also this elevator, which is a nice touch to facilitate traversal to the surface. I do hope they have a different one for commerce though, as not much would fit on this little thing. Not that they could get cars through this small door. I'm sure it's just a pedestrian entrance. They must have a larger gate somewhere else. They must, as Durian's stable would never get down there. Dwarves respect the mountain and revere it to a degree, treat it as a living being, a deity almost.
You see, a mountain's like a person. It's a long and ever-changing story made of countless small parts. Earth and ore, air and water.
It is their home and provider after all, so it is understandable they wish to maintain its structural integrity. Even their prospecting is mindful of the potential risk every bit of digging might mean. They sing a magic song, a loud voice that vibrates the whole mountain.
Sing to it properly. Each of those parts will reflect your song back to you.
Different materials resonate at different frequencies, which allows the dwarves to essentially feel out where they should and should not mine.
Telling you its story, showing you what might be hidden, where to mine, where to tunnel, and where to leave the mountain untouched.
A nice bit of lore I might add, as it explores how magic would alter such a process. Prospecting is also not the only reason they sing. They sometimes issue pleas to the very stone, and it seemingly answers.
It was a plea to the rocks, to release the bodies of the miners with breath still inside them.
I just pulled out the last one. Alive. All of them alive.
The unnatural way the dust dances here, as well as how each attempt to mine mithril is responded to by tremors, seems to suggest that the mountain indeed has a mind, even if the answer is not definitive. While, similar to the elves, we get relatively little of their society, we do know that they are ruled by a king and have various noble lords. These lords have some sway over the decision of the crown, but their level of influence is not well defined. Dwarves in general also dislike elves.
Tell me, why should we trust any elf?
But are not above diplomacy or commerce. We coincidentally learn of one of their pastimes, challenging each other or even outsiders, seeing who can break the most rocks with a hammer. Dwarves are clearly very enthusiastic about this sport, but I guess not enough to know the rules. I'm again being half facetious here. There is a horribly clumsy exploratory dialogue where Durin details what the game is, in front of dwarves and an elf who all know this.
Dwarven test of endurance. Once we lift our hammers, we shall break the great stones until one of us can break no more.
The audience does not, so the information is necessary, but the delivery is bad. The first part is that Aaron had the perfect opportunity to explain it to Celebrimbor, who even asked about it.
I invoke the right of Sigyn Tarag. What is the right?
There is no reason to be vague or secretive here, so a few lines by the dwarves open the gate and come out would have sufficed, and yet...
I'll rejoin you in the Regium. Are you certain you know what you're doing? Lord Celebrimbor, trust me.
As an added note, while the game is seemingly played with rather high stakes, it has apparently no binding power.
Should the elf forfeit, he will be banished from all Dwarven lands. Forever!
Yes, Durin proclaims Aaron is to be exiled if he loses, but that never happens. The penalty is simply forgotten. What's more, nobody ever brings up that the Prince of Khazad-dûm forbade Aaron from setting foot in all Dwarven lands.
Are you certain?
Those stakes could not have been lower. Now there is one more significant element to the dwarves which does teach us a bit about them, something that is linked to the tree rot of the elves. I think it is a good time as any to explore this plotline. So the dwarves have found a new material, mithril, which is not only strong but extremely light, something that could revolutionize their tools, armaments, machinery, buildings and subsequently their society. Naturally, they try to mine as much of it as they can, but it proves to be extremely hazardous.
It's perilous to mine.
Their attempts to acquire the metal caused tremors throughout their home, threatening to bury them under the mountain. As a result, the king makes the, in my opinion, right decision to hold all operations.
My father has restricted our every efforts.
Currently, their methods and technology are unfit to perform this work, or potentially the very stone itself is trying to keep them from it. Durin, on the other hand, is not willing to give up and resumes to mine in secret. Aaron, his so-called friend and full-time slimy bastard, spies on him and infiltrates the operation, learning of the mithril. Without going into the not exactly stellar character work here, which will have its dedicated section, the elf receives a piece.
Keep it. Token of our friendship.
But as they are talking, another cave-in traps 3 miners.
There's 4 dwarves down there!
While the rescue ends up being successful, Durin's father is furious for disobeying his orders and putting lives at risk, dismantling the secret operation.
He shut it down. The whole vein is to be sealed off.
Understandable, and Durin does admit to have been in the wrong, in probably one of the few actually rather good scenes the show has to offer. It's probably surprising and not exactly flattering, but I'd call this the pinnacle of the series.
Forgive me, Father. I was proud and stubborn, and I was wrong.
Our people believe that when a new dwarf king is crowned, the voices of all his forebears flow into him. But you need not wait for that day to hear my voice. Forever am I with you. My son. Even in anger. Sometimes in anger most of all. There is nothing to forgive.
It's only downhill from here at varying slope angles. Either way, Durin is invited to the elves to maintain good relations.
Elrond has invited me to go with him to Linden tomorrow. There is something more at work.
Good, my son. Go to Linden. Find out what.
Both him and his father suspect something is at work here, and they are dead on the money, even though the plot itself is rather odd and nonsensical. The plotline continues with the clumsy diplomacy scene I've already briefly touched upon. Elrond, and subsequently us, finally learn what it is that good old Gil is planning. So, when the tree started to rot, he sent Galadriel away as a countermeasure. However, he was apparently so sure that it would not work, he set in motion a rather expensive project, something of a Hail Mary, before her ship even left, probably before she even came back to Linden.
We first took notice of it just prior to Galadriel's return.
He noticed that the Dwarven kingdom is more prosperous than ever and theorized they found something precious.
In recent months, your furnaces are said to be burning as bright as the eyes of Aule himself. Your mines delving ever deeper.
That is odd. The dwarves only ever extracted a tiny amount of mithril, and while valuable, definitely not enough to usher in a golden age, especially since they don't trade or use the very material. It just sits in a box as far as we know. So he made a massive leap in logic, but was accidentally right. He had another theory though. There is an odd little elven legend where one of their warriors and the Baroque have a tree touching contest. I'm not kidding, they battle by who can put more of their power into the tree. Granted, it is no ordinary tree, it is one of the lost Silmarils, essentially an artifact of great power. As they try to dominate the wood, a lightning strikes it so the tree becomes a metal and seeps into the mountain beneath. Now, if the location would be part of the legend, I'd understand the connection, even if it is vague, but this is a leap of cosmic proportions. He's right on the money again, naturally, but connecting the dwarves becoming richer with them finding the tree metal from an old legend, what if they just found more gold, or something different, which has to be the reason anyway? I guess Gil is just extremely lucky. Now, the tree rot is caused by corruption, so how could some random metal stop, let alone revert the process? Well, according to the legend, the good of the elf and the evil of the Baroque both got poured into the stuff, which gave its properties.
A power as pure and light, as good, as strong and unyielding as evil.
Set aside how Gil thinks evil's virtue is strength, he also thinks that the metal, without ever having seen it or heard the description, is emanating the light of the Valar. Just to reiterate, the Valar are the good gods. As for why evil is not emanating from it in any way, we can only guess. He is right, of course. Why would he not be? That might lead to some character development or a more dynamic plot, and we don't want that.
It is our only salvation. Elrond, I have tested it. Under every duress, nothing diminishes its light. Enough to saturate every last elf in the light of the Valar once more.
So his theory is that if the elves get enough of it and bathe in its light or something, they will be healed. Naturally, this would actually be the case. So his plan is to grant Celebrimbor the funds to build a magic forge where they can test and process the mithril, but not the workforce. No, for that he sends Elrond and Hosted. Not only does he think of contacting the dwarves for help, but also that his relations are still strong enough to negotiate with them.
That would require
a workforce greater than any ever assembled, yes. The High King cannot provide one, so he has sent me you instead.
He is half wrong on this one, as Elrond has not visited his supposed Dwarven friend a single time in the last 20 years, who has grown to resent him for it. It's all good though. Elrond apologizes and emotionally manipulates him to renew their friendship, then exploit him to the fullest. Then Gil's plan involves Celebrimbor suggesting to Elrond that Durin is up to something.
No, I promised myself I wouldn't mention it. He's your friend. Either he's avoiding me, or he's hiding something.
The smith stumbles over himself to make the most thinly veiled attempt at manipulation. But Aaron falls for it, or wants to exploit his friend some more, so goes along anyway. Now, as luck would have it, Urine is up to something. The secret mining operation has been discussed. Gil probably won his kingdom on a lottery or something, or he actually knows the script. I mean future. Now we will discuss how Aaron deals exactly with his oath to Urine not to talk about the Mithril, but of course he spills the beans.
I did not come to Khazad-dûm for friendship, but ambition. I did not know it, but I came for Mithril.
Granted, there is a lot at stake, as they may all have to leave their home their entire lives, or face death if they stay. Urine does forgive him as well, and proposes to his father to start mining again. The elves offer them an incredible amount of resources in return.
The elves are prepared to furnish this city with game, grain, and timber from the elder forests of Eriador for the next 5 centuries.
That might cripple the elves financially. I'm not entirely convinced that that is something the elves would be willing to provide, but alas, they would lose everything otherwise. I would have liked a bit more negotiation nonetheless than just going all in. Either way, the Dwarven king refuses.
Do not take an earth that cannot support it.
Now he tries to lay out his reasons, even if he does not really do the best job.
Tempting shadow, rock and mine to bury us all beneath the mountain. I will not risk Dwarven lives to help the elves cheat death.
The way I see it, mining Mithril, regardless of who does it, could lead to the entire mountain collapsing and killing his entire nation, or at the very least destroy them to a degree they could never recover from. Additionally, if the elves are losing the light of the Valar, that means this is the will of the gods themselves. They want the elves to leave the continent, as they would not deny them their blessing. Opposing such powers would be rather unwise.
The fate of the elves was decided many ages ago by minds much wiser, much farther seeing than our own. Defy their will, and this entire kingdom might fall, perhaps the entire Middle Earth.
I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt that this is what he meant with his words. It's just that Durin did not fully understand his arguments. I'm probably being too generous here, aren't I? Now the storyline does continue, with more secret mining operations getting dismantled. These are going from wholesome to power-hungry tyrant in a second, and this whole thing. But those are better discussed in relation to different topics. We are still discussing races and factions, and are yet to make a conclusion for the dwarves. As you can see, while being a mixed bag with some lesser flows, unexplored areas, and wasted potential, there is something to appreciate here. We know a bit about their aspirations, what they like, their general attitude, what and how they worship, what they do with their time. I'd hesitate to say they are well done, but they're not bad, and far from the worst the show has to offer. Let's move on to still not the worst race and or faction, humans.
Drinks all round!
Now, there is little of note to mention here. Chances are you listening to this video, which I very much appreciate, are a human. As such, you know what a Homo sapiens sapiens is and how they operate. Except... Alright, let's get this conversation out of the way. It's not the first time I mention this, and it will most likely not be the last. Ethnicity. So when an author takes something from the real world and places it into a fictional one, they rely on the audience's knowledge of the very thing. They essentially have to give no explanations or exposition. The viewer knows what to expect, and what would be impossible, unlikely, a great feat or an easy task. They have a solid grasp on what the stakes can be. As a result, whenever the author decides to make alterations to a thing they took from real life, it is up to them to communicate what the changes are, especially if those are plot relevant. Not only that, but for the sake of verisimilitude, to make the suspension of disbelief as easy as possible, they need to understand the consequences of these changes and what they communicate about the world or what they can potentially conflict with. I don't want to discuss the marketing material, as I've already stated before, or the theories and likely motivations behind hide the ethnic mix-up of the show, but one thing is for certain, we were supposed to notice it. This is not a non-diegetic feature, as odd as that would be. These people are mixed race in-universe. I probably don't have to tell you that ethnicity is not a random characteristic. It's not a choice, it's not a dice roll upon birth, it is not an interchangeable trait. Our genetics are a window into our heritage, who our ancestors were, where they lived, what were the challenges in their environment, where they migrated to, and so much more. As time moves forward and technology advances, distance shrinks. That, paired with how history develops, makes some more modern societies consist of multiple races, with some becoming melting pots of various ethnicities and cultures. Despite the fact that the show seems to ignore it, distance is very much an obstacle in this world. Certain historical events that happened in the country of the showrunners also did not take place here. It makes little sense for a region with seemingly European climate to have random people with significantly higher melanin content in their skin. Genetics and biology are most definitely a thing, as these are humans with all of their bodily functions. They are not beings of pure energy or code, they are flesh and bone, which has implications. Is it impossible for them to have traveled here from faraway lands? No. But it is unlikely, and more unlikely with every occurrence. One hobbit from Middle-earth's equivalent of Africa. Sure, some nods or mentions that he's from somewhere else wouldn't go amiss, but looking past that should not be too difficult. A darker-skinned elf? They have a whole continent to themselves. Even though the sun hasn't been around from the very beginning, there might be some ethnic diversification going on in Valinor. Mixed skin tones in Númenor? That's a bit odd. They had that island for centuries at the very least, probably more. One would think that their population would have homogenized by now, even if they originated from different parts of the world. What about the Southlands? Even though they are to the south, the climate suggests they are well above the equator of the planet, which at this point should be a thing. They just seem like a random hodgepodge of people, not a coherent nation. And the dwarves? I do not recall anyone beside Tisa not having a lighter tone, and she does stick out. Dwarves are supposedly mainly subterranean, so they should be even paler than they are. Is there a dwarven nation that lives on the surface in an area with a lot of sunshine? Seems doubtful, and there is nothing to support it either. The only logical conclusion is that people of widely different lineage and genetics are somehow native to the same regions. As I said, suspension of disbelief is best made easy, and this is not helping. Now, if I were to steelman possibly the strongest counter-argument, I could say that when the gods created these species, back when the world was not even a planet, they decided to play around with genetics a bit and distributed the various nations without separation of any kind. Sure, that could be true, but thousands of years have passed since then. Remember, there wasn't even a sun for a long time. Every group would have homogenized to a much greater degree, unless there is active segregation or deep-rooted prejudice against interracial marriage and the like. I highly doubt that is what the creators would be going for, but that is the only actual explanation that does not require us to just ignore the different ethnicities, something the showrunners definitely do not want us to do. It is such a painful thing that modern Western settings awkwardly try and shove artificial diversity into every faction instead of introducing it organically. Take a look at the world map. You don't have to restrict yourself to a single corner. You aren't forbidden to use travelers, conquerors, refugees, anyone who could feasibly appear at the place of your story and fit them in that way. Expanding the world, creating the potential of unique interactions, contrasting drastically different worldviews and societies who never met before, all this and more achieved by just a bit of work. Instead of testing your audience of how many unanswered questions and contradictions they can take before just checking out, you facilitate their engagement with the material, help them deepen their immersion, lure them in with the prospect of intriguing questions that do have satisfying answers, even if not revealed outright. But I guess that takes dedication and talent. Not giving a fuck is much easier to do. So, aside from the genetic slot machine creating varied, but still mostly white kids, these people are just like you. Therefore, it only makes sense to tackle them from the faction perspective. Let's start with the Southlands, as I've already mentioned some plot elements linked to them earlier on. So this is the place. Well, it starts out more like this. The people living here are mostly peasants, harvesting crop, hunting, crafting their tools, and not taking a bath even if their life depended on it. Well, except her. She is also allowed to wear color. Most Southlanders wear dark brown or drab rags, sometimes nothing but an apron. We have little idea of what they do beyond their chores, what they believe in, or their societal structure. Their ancestors sided with Morgoth back in the day, but none of those people live at this point. It is unlikely many of them still worship evil. And even if they do, they must do it in secret, as the elves are looking over them. Not that their observation skills are particularly good, but I digress. We know of a total of one person who is loyal to the old ways.
Have you heard of him, lad? Have you heard of Sauron?
Ooh, I'm just gonna call Baldric, as I thought that was his name until I started reading the subtitles. Also, this is most of the population. Yeah, we do not know exactly how many villages there are and how many were already enslaved at this point in time, but it is fair to assume that this is at least half, if not the majority of the Southlands. Not that many. Well, maybe the smart ones left, as the ones who are there are truly beyond retarded. Let me elaborate a bit. Remember the time around here and this lady found a ransacked village? Well, after the peasants get some evidence that orcs are encroaching on their home, they decide to go to a more fortified area to weather the storm. Somehow the other villages get news of this as well, but let's assume some were kind enough to go from settlement to settlement and warned people. Well, all of these brainlets forgot to bring food.
Potatoes!
Where's the rest?
That is the rest.
I guess they expected the abandoned watchtower to be fully stocked. They try hunting, but the animals have more brain cells than them because they are leaving this region.
Woods are all bare. Animals are all fled.
What do they do to survive? Well, I have a whole segment dedicated to the failings and slimy arrogance of this thing, so I won't get into that now, but expect many more brain-dead plans. Still, those are not necessarily a testament to how stupid the Southlanders are, as those asinine schemes slipped out of the defunct mind of a single person. Well, maybe two. Either way, this has already illustrated the level of intelligence we are dealing with here, but let me substantiate it a bit more. So there is a point in the story where the orcs are mounting an attack against the watchtower en masse. Their leader gives a choice to the peasants. They can abandon the tower and swear fealty to him, or they can stay there and die.
Your people may live if you forsake all claim to these lands and swear fealty to him.
But if you choose to stand with me and fight, this tower will no longer be a reminder of our frailty, but a symbol of our strength.
Now you, with your galaxy brain, might have already thought of a third option: leaving. About half of the Southlanders decide to take Adar, the orc leader, up on his offer and join them. Now, orcs are not exactly the best allies, but I can understand their decision. They want to stay where their home is and don't want to die. The other half just stays there. They have sickles, pitchforks, some hunting bows, sharpened sticks, and there are about, let's be generous, 100 of them. Instead of just leaving, looking for someplace else they can settle where there is no orc army to threaten them, they decide to hunker down and prepare for a siege. Well, not really, they make zero preparations for quite a long time, they just sit around hoping to get liberated. I have no idea what they expect. Do they think that invading orcs will just do their thing and then fuck off? Leaving does not cross their mind a single time, not as long as a bloody volcano erupts. Then they actually decide to move, and what do you know, there is an abandoned Númenórean outpost close by.
Where will you go?
An old Númenórean colony, by the mouth of the Anduin. Pelage, they called it. They say there's fresh land, fresh water.
If we get to see that next season, if there is a next season, and it turns out to be better than their shit-stained hovels, I'm going to be even more pissed about this writing blunder. So we've established that these people are not very bright, dislike elves in general, but are not innately evil. Is there anything more to them? Well, there is one thing. You see, back when the war was raging on, the Southlands had a royal family, a line of kings leading them. Unfortunately, that line has died out more than 1,000 years ago.
There is no king of the Southlands. The line was broken. The last man to bear your crest died over 1,000 years ago.
Still, the peasants have a legend or prophecy of some sorts that their true king will one day return.
One day, our true king will return.
Now, these are the very words they used the one time that an actual local references the legend, so do they not know the line is broken? How can a true king who was never born return? Well, whatever way you do it, these massive intellectuals have an infallible method to identify him. He will have a pouch with the royal sigil. Yes, that's it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but last time I checked, objects can be traded freely between people. Therefore, whoever happens to find a pouch with the sigil of your former royal family is not necessarily part of their lineage. On the contrary, the line is broken, so he will be just some random guy, very possibly someone who defiled one of the highborn graves. Well, guess what? That happens. Indeed, it is Sauron who even admits to taking the pouch off of some dead guy.
I told you I found it on a dead man.
But still acts as if it was important to him just to mislead the audience. Truly the work of a genius, this plotline. So Sauron returns to the Southlands, which I'll detail later on, and has the pouch. While checking out his junk, I assume as she has no other reason to immediately glance down there, herbalist woman notices the fabled pouch. The magical powers of the thing activate and also attract a bunch of filthy peasants, because I have no other way to explain how they suddenly take interest in the guy from an angle they can at best hardly see the sigil.
Is it true? Are you the king we were promised?
She asks if he is the true king. Sauron hesitates, but ultimately says yes, so he is now king of the 40 or so flea-ridden Southlanders left and their rundown villages. Don't worry though, the upcoming eruption will replenish their numbers. They clearly breed in the dirt. As to how him being Sauron and the destruction of their homeland will affect this nation, I have no idea, and with so little of their society revealed or so few of their characters developed to any degree, I struggle to care. Seriously, other than this one, her son who can blink normally, and Baldric, there's no one of note.
Where's the rest? That is the rest.
The cattle herder guy was probably their best one, and he's dead now too. He showed concern over his animal, was helpful and tried to do his part in supporting his people, as well as fought valiantly in the most ass-backwards battle in cinema history. He grew concerned when tensions rose high at the tavern, as well as showed respect to the elf who helped them, despite his reluctance to interact with him before. Yes, this is all it takes to outshine the competition in this series, be an actual person. Rest in peace, Mr. Herder. I wish she would have died a horrible death instead. That's everything we can say about these people in general, so let's move on to the other human faction, Númenóreans. They are probably the most developed of the bunch, due not in small part to the source material from which they took some things and changed others. So Númenor is an island west of Middle-earth, but east of Valinor. The ancestors of these people fought on the side of the elves in the war against Morgoth, and so the Valar gave them a prosperous island. It seemingly has a temperate climate, is relatively large, and home to multiple settlements. Well, we really only see one, and the interior of a library at another, but I doubt everyone congregates in the capital, so there must be more. Being an island nation, the Númenóreans have a large fleet and are experienced mariners. They patrol the seas around their isle, and I assume do a lot of fishing. Much of their culture is linked to the ocean itself. Their sea guard is a prestigious establishment, and they have a saying. Oh boy, do they have a saying. This show has a habit of interjecting nonsensical proverbs and allegories, which I guess to the showrunners sounded highbrow or eloquent, but almost always come off as clumsy or outright gibberish. I have compiled quite a few throughout my second watch through, and I guess this is the perfect opportunity to go on another tangent. But before I do that, let's hear what the Númenórean one is.
The sea is always right! The sea is always right!
The sea is always right. Now, you might be wondering what this means. Is this some odd attempt at alluding to the fact that the sea cannot be tamed and one has to adapt to it? Do they perhaps have some deep connection to a deity or sapient personification of the waves who grants them its wisdom should they call upon it? Oh no, dear viewer, you are way too generous with your interpretation. It is literal. Whatever the sea does, whoever it kills, whatever it destroys, or whatever it gives, that was meant to be like that. What an infallible logic. How is this proverb useful, you may ask? Well, it isn't. It's just an excuse to interpret whatever you want, really. Except you cannot be upset at anything the sea causes, as it is always right.
It was the sea that put her in my path. And the sea is always right.
Alandia's wife drowned, by the way. He is still a firm believer in this nonsense.
His mother.
She drowned. And the sea is always right.
One of their rituals just involves a person shouting at the sea that it is always right. Riveting stuff. Now let's see what else we have.
Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? Because the stone sees only downward. The darkness of the water is vast and irresistible. The ship feels the darkness as well, striving moment by moment to master her and pull her under. But the ship has a secret. Her gaze is not downward but up, fixed upon the light that guides her.
But sometimes the lights shine just as brightly reflected in the water as they do in the sky. It's hard to say which way is up and which way is down. How am I to know which lights to follow?
Sometimes we cannot know until we have touched the darkness.
Why does the ship float and the rock sink? The ship is not even looking up, or the rock down for that matter. Could you not have used some more fitting words? What does this even mean? If somebody has seen, or I guess engaged with evil before they will fall into the depths? But he also says that one has to touch the darkness to know what the light is. First of all, no, you just need to have a concept of right and wrong, which you can more or less construct from your own experiences, and basic fucking compassion. Secondly, all of it is only this awkward because they were desperately clamoring to make the first scene, the advice, and this atrocity we have not yet discussed, to line up. Ship light up, darkness water down. They made millions writing this, by the way.
We're the ones holding the long end of the hammer here.
This line from Durin is actually a good one, holding the long end of the hammer signifying they are ready to strike with it. Smithing and hammers being prominent elements of Dwarven society, it is rather fitting too, and definitely realistic as a saying that would catch on. See, not all of them are bad.
We can return in force and sweep the enemy from these lands like salt from a table.
Like salt from a table. Do elves often have a problem of salt getting onto their tables in large quantities, so they need to sweep them down? Using their hands, I assume. This just sounds odd. It does not seem like something that would become common, especially in terms of wiping an enemy. Why didn't he say dust? That sounds a lot more organic, in the same spirit, and actually a common enough activity to highlight how easily they plan to do it. A routine task, you could say. Salt from a fucking table.
Nobody goes off train. And nobody walks alone. Nobody goes off train. And nobody walks alone.
The Harfoot song. What a travesty. I'll detail it with their faction overview, but there's still a massive problem with it, even without context. This is a song. They repeat these two short sentences in a mind-numbing tone. So, just because a society is primitive, does not mean they have no concept of music or singing. If anyone had to do this for extended amounts of time, they would decaravan voluntarily. This shit would never catch on. Also, again, subtle as a nuclear detonation. Would you believe that these traits are the ones the writers want to communicate about the off-brand hobbits? Shocking, I know. Funny thing is that they also fail to keep to these words.
Cleverness to men of small ambition. I'd much rather it if you were wise, my son.
Why is being clever a bad thing again? Isn't a quick-witted person, or someone who can make connections and conclusions easily, desirable for a political position? Are cleverness and wisdom mutually exclusive traits? Why are you like this? This is not a clever or wise line, it is a petty man's attempt to have a comeback at every turn. or a bad writer's attempt to portray a smart man.
So this is about vengeance.
One cannot satisfy thirst by drinking seawater.
What a gem. They were so proud of this one they used it twice.
Elbrand, put it down. One cannot satisfy thirst by drinking seawater.
Now, this is a fact. Salt water does not satiate thirst. Why is this a saying though? What does it mean? Well, Galadriel always uses it when dissuading Sauron from vengeance. As to how salt water comes here, I can only guess. I assume they meant that your thirst for vengeance cannot be sated with vengeance? Huh? Fuck me, what is this line? And from her of all people? Was this a first draft and they remembered it? Let's just move on to the next one, I can't even.
Give me the meat, and give it to me raw.
This one's just funny. There's no way nobody noticed the optics here during lusting for Elrond's meat. Raw. I'm actually glad they kept it.
What cannot be known hollows the mind. Fill it not with guesswork.
What a banger of a line, this one. Disregarding the fact that it is said by the one person who filled her hollow mind with as much guesswork as she could get her bony fingers on, what does this tell us? Should we not assume? Should we not make educated guesses? Should we not try to predict things? Someone has to suffer from brain rot to think this is sound advice. She could have said, do not assume the worst, or try to base your assumptions on what you do know, but nah, just don't think about stuff you do not already know. It makes holes in your brain, I guess. These are the most notable sayings, good or bad. Mostly bad. Very bad. Let's just move on with the Númenóreans. So being a naval faction, they can probably travel at a rather high speed over the waves due to their expertise. Probably because distance does not exist in this show. I hate to do this, but here comes a new tangent right away. I'll be quick, I promise. Celebrimbor and Elrond go on a leisurely afternoon stroll to get to Khazad-dûm. They don't change their clothes or take any equipment with them. Caleb carries on with the momentum and just walks back home right after. This map shows the distance. This shot establishes it. Fucking how? Did they ride horses off screen? In this scene, Galadriel begins chasing Adar and Sauron notices, so a bit late but also takes pursuit. They ride for quite a long time. Then fucking Sauron teleports in front of them. Galadriel even used magic to speed up her steed. How did Sauron, without even being visible, make a massive loop and get ahead? Easy. Distance is subjective in this setting. These awful characters and the guy who arrives with a meteorite are about half a day ahead of the Harfoots, who go after them way too late. They catch up by sundown, despite their shorter stature and smaller steps. How convenient. I guess they just loitered around for several hours. To be fair, the dialogue does suggest that, instead of telling Meteor Men what they want as soon as they meet, they wait until the camera is back on them again, countless hours later. There are multiple examples of this, but the most egregious is the one involving the Western Ocean. When Galadriel and company are sailing to Valinor, which is this distance, they do the whole journey standing still. I guess elves are very patient and disciplined. Then Galadriel just jumps out right before they reach the continent and decides to swim back. This distance. What's more, when the Númenóreans decide to sail east to fight the orcs, they travel all of this distance in about a day, then sail up a river for another half day.
It's a full day's sail into the mountains.
Then ride at full speed for a day to get to the filthy village of these miserable fuckers.
And from there, another day's ride east into the Vale.
This speed is insane. How small is this planet? We'll get to the full day's ride too, don't worry, but let me hammer this point home. I said they sail east. The sun is rising that way, so yes, everything is correct. Now, this scene takes place the next morning. Notice anything odd? The sun is behind them. They are riding west.
And from there, another day's ride east into the Vale.
Did they fucking overshoot with the river? Elendil even says they will ride east, so why didn't they? Is the aesthetic of riding with the sun rising behind so important that the geography of this world has to bend to facilitate it? Holy fuck, did they not give a shit about consistency? So, distance and directions are all subjective, and the map is irrelevant. Therefore, it is not the feat of the Númenóreans that they got there so fast. It is the failing of the writers. By the way, if you have not seen the show, you might be wondering why the fleet of this powerful human nation is so tiny. Well, their massive invading force consists of 3 ships. It used to be 5, but the stored explosive aboard 2 of them have gone off. Let's not get ahead of ourselves though. As I've said, Númenor was gifted to the humans by the Valar.
Our ancestors were not given anything. They paid for this isle with the blood of their kin.
The island also holds a palantir, essentially a crystal ball that shows visions of possible futures. This one is special as it only has a single prophecy: Númenor swallowed by the sea. The former king saw it, and the current regent, Muriel, has also engaged with the visions. Now, while these people used to be on quite good terms with the elves, relations have soured and they have shut themselves off.
Once elves came and went freely from these shores, Númenor began to turn away our ships. In time, they broke off all contact.
Not only from the elves, they also withdrew from their former outposts, focusing their efforts home. While I can understand the diplomatic mishaps, I find it hard to justify them abandoning what could be potential trade hubs on the shores of Middle-earth, especially since they seem to want to trade.
Wars, forests, trade, tribute. I wouldn't dare stop that, not for all the salt in the sea.
But I digress. Unfortunately, the palantir seems to suggest that this deviation from the ways of their ancestors is the very thing that spells their doom. The former king desperately tried to mend their relationship with the elves, and the Númenóreans deposed him for it. Well, not quite. He is still the king, but his daughter Muriel is the queen regent, ruling in his stead.
He became strident, claiming that we provoked the anger of the Valar and must repent and return to the old ways.
The people rebelled.
I was chosen to rule in his stead.
While she vowed not to follow in the footsteps of her father, she has little choice when it comes to avoiding the prophecy. So when Galadriel arrives at the island, something that heralds the future they fear,
The vision begins with your arrival.
She has to be very careful with how she proceeds. Well, we are led to believe that, but there is very little pushback when she finally decides to follow Galadriel to the Southlands and liberate the peasants there.
And so, I've decided to personally escort the elf back to Middle-earth to aid our mortal brethren, who are now besieged in the Southlands.
Your queen has laid bare her intent. Our ships will depart in 10 days.
Anyone can volunteer for this war.
The expeditionary force will be made up of brave sons and daughters from across fair Númenor.
And literally anyone does. Like, what are you going to do in a battle, lady? Or you? Do you want to fight on the front lines? I guess they are just that patriotic. They want to die while invading a foreign land on behalf of an elf whom they supposedly hate. I just love consistency. Regardless, Muriel designates the army as 500 men and 5 ships. Just let me put a screenshot of the Númenórean harbor here. Here's this one too. They sent 5 ships, which I struggle to believe could fit 100 men and apparently horses. Especially next to the explosive barrels they absolutely need. This here is Kevin.
I'm coming.
He really wants to get into the good graces of this girl, who is against the war as her brother and father would also depart. He tries to convince his father, the advisor to the regent, but fails. So as the next logical step, he attempts to blow up the ships. I have no idea how he planned that, as the casks are so volatile he would have gone up in flames was it not for the cave that served as a fuse here. Still, he manages to destroy 2 whole ships. Kevin and the guy who tried to stop him are the only ones that are in the water after the explosion. Kind of suspicious. They lie about fishing and Isildur, this guy, saving Kevin. This is the following line.
We have reason to suspect a passing brigand, but we've yet to identify him.
It was a passing brigand. Of course, who else could it have been but a person nobody saw and nobody knows anything about? It definitely wasn't one or both of the young men found in the water with an extremely flimsy cover story and ample motivation. So, the Númenóreans are also stupid. Brilliant. Either way, 2 ships down. Still, the queen wants to go. Naturally, 2 more ships would be prepared to replace the losses, right? Nah, just go with 3. Did they reduce the number of soldiers? Who knows? Don't worry or think about anything. Still, even if they did make the necessary cuts, just look at the size of these boats. These little dinghies carried all of this, plus TNT barrels, and the assembly kit for Númenórean fortifications. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself though. So while it causes a bit of turmoil and the leaders think about cancelling the invasion,
perhaps we did act in haste. Kingdom should be led, not dragged. I recommend we delay the voyage until we've had time enough to win more hearts to your cause.
They ultimately decide to go after all. That's when the whole supersonic travel takes place, including the riding bit. Now, you might be wondering what information the Númenóreans are working with. Do they know the urgency? Do they have any idea of what is going on in the Southlands beyond the presence of an unknown quantity of orcs? Well, Sauron, whose plan it was originally to build the Evil Dam, knows that Adar wants to capture the Watchtower.
And where did the enemy head next?
Further south, I should think. Towards the Watchtower of Osterith.
He does relay this, but it's likely been years since he was last in the area, so he does not know how far his adversary has made it. You might be scratching your head, why the full-speed one-day charge then? If the tower is already taken and fortified, they wouldn't want to face the foe exhausted. Not that them or the horses are exhausted at the end of it, but what is cause and effect anyway? Well, I guess they just had a hunch. Sauron knows the plan has not been enacted because the region is still not Mordor, but he can't really detail that without becoming suspicious. The in-universe reason is lacking, but the meta reason is to have this shot and desperately try and recreate the ride of the Rohirrim. By the way, while they are blindly charging, they had the time to put this together. Yes, after the volcano erupts, the wounded return to this already built outpost.
Where are we even going?
Númenor set their camp upon that ridgeline.
If distance wasn't enough, the show killed time too. Consistently, throughout the series, the audience cannot possibly have any semblance of an idea about the passage of time. In some storylines, seemingly weeks or months pass between scenes, like the building of the magic forge we just skip over. Others, it's maybe a day, sometimes just hours. The fact that these plotlines with wildly different time frames are mixed together would not necessarily be a problem, but they manage to make it one. There are numerous instances when an event connects them, and they somehow always line up perfectly. I've already criticized the show's tendency to rush, but it also meanders at times. Did the peasants spend days in the Watchtower, or weeks? Did the Númenóreans prepare for the expedition for days, or weeks? Did the Harfoots migrate for weeks or months? Did this show accelerate my dementia by years or decades? I simply do not have it in me to once again go through the entire series with a fine-tooth comb and try to draw up a timeline. I already know it is going to be all out of whack by the few examples I showed. Having finished yet another tangent, let me get back to talking about the Númenóreans. So we already know they bend the laws of physics to be able to do the things they do, but what do these actions tell us about them? Well, in a brand new fashion after the elves, they are horrible warriors. Let's disregard the fact that they are going to invade a foreign land with soldiers that began their training a few days or weeks or whatever amount of time before actually setting off. They train on the streets, on stairs no less. It's not like the Southlands is rich in naturally occurring stairs, so I find it odd they practice on such specific terrain, with sharp swords. Yes, as evidenced by cutting this rope and Galadriel's clothes, these blades are very much capable of killing, and they swing them around with reckless abandon and no trace of finesse or skill. I probably don't have to tell you how dangerous that is, or why practice weapons exist. There's also this gem of combat with professional guards. They aren't much better on the battlefield either. When they are not employing the uniquely ineffective tactic of tackling from horseback, they do things like standing around with a horse and swapping down from a saddle, expecting that they will not get dragged down. There's also this brilliant maneuver, the combat bowling. Even if they could, against all odds, actually hold onto that chain dragging dozens of orcs, how is this effective? They did not kill or incapacitate anyone, and there's zero follow-up. I guess they mildly inconvenience them, waging a war of attrition, I assume. Not that the orcs are any better here. They don't even try to jab or slash at the cavalry, gracefully riding past them. We'll get to them too, don't you worry. If that wasn't enough, the average Númenórean is also rather stupid. They think because one elf was fished out of the sea, other elves will come and take their jobs.
Elf workers, taking your trades! Workers who don't sleep, don't tire, don't age.
siege!
I struggle to think of a reason why elves would want to do that, but let me introduce a bit more context to this thing too. This man has just been assaulted by Sauron. He wanted to join a smithy, but one needs a guild crest to do that.
But until you've earned your guild crest, you can't forge steel in Númenóreans.
He decided to steal one, was caught, and beat the shit out of several people. It was the magical being disguised as a human who tried to take their jobs, literally, and they used brutal force against them. This person was the one whose guild crest he tried to steal. I guess that hit really rattled his handful of brain cells in there to make the opposite conclusion. Another example of stupidity is the whole passing brigand thing, but I won't get into that one again. They also don't really care about the well-being of their own people. After Mount Doom explodes, they get whoever they can, march out of the smoke, bind their wounds, and just fuck off immediately.
Preparations are nearly complete. We can depart within the hour.
It is a miracle, or rather an impossibility, that they are even alive. There must be injured who cannot yet be moved, who would die on the way back, not even mentioning the possibly considerable amount of people still trapped in that hellscape. Not even Elendil is willing to go back for his son. Unbelievable. At least Muriel tries to save as many people as she can. Not just Númenóreans either, the filthy peasants too. She gets blinded for her efforts. Plus her dad dies at home for good measure. Anyway, that's a lot of negatives, but are there any more redeeming qualities? Well, they can certainly build. The city is impressive, even if the CGI is not always convincing. The ships are pretty too, even if this one cannot be rowed backwards because some brainlet designed it. They are patriotic too, willing to do a lot for their nation, even if not for their fellow people. They also have a prestigious academy we know next to nothing about. Conclusion, they are kind of terrible in many ways and have very few surface level positives. They also struggle from the age-old problem where the series tells the audience one thing but shows the complete opposite, like with their combat prowess. Not good, but still far from the worst the show has to offer. Let's move on to orcs. Now, they are an interesting bunch in general, as we rarely get anything of real substance about these guys in any of the adaptations. Is it different here? Well, let's see. So, as per the lore, orcs are tortured, disfigured and corrupted elves, created as a separate race by Morgoth.
When I was a child, I heard stories of elves taken by Morgoth, tortured, twisted, made into a new and ruined form of life.
Apparently, he made them in different batches, and the first one, the Uruks, are still very elven. Adar is the only one of them we know of, and he has the ability to make the more modern, useless and weak orc variety. While they are not completely useless, their skills are plot dependent. He keeps making more and more. From what material? I don't know, maybe he breeds them? Still, he wishes to grant them a home.
We are creations of the One, master of the secret fire, the same as you. As worthy of the breath of life, and just as worthy of a home.
Now, this is all well and good, but he kind of does so by kidnapping and enslaving people, forcing them to work in miserable conditions, often with horribly inefficient tools like the XX. As a result, it is difficult to show any form of sympathy. Well, he does offer the Watchtower people a chance to join. Granted, they do have to go back and fight the rest of the peasants, as only blood can bind.
Only blood can bind.
We are fighting our own.
He does like his wargs though, tearing people apart. You know, there is nothing wrong with someone being evil or having a distorted sense of morality in a story, but this is not the case. Adar clearly has empathy for his children and thinks they are treated unfairly. They just want a home, after all. He is extremely hypocritical. Sheds a tear when mercy killing an orc, but forces humans to murder each other for the privilege of swearing fealty. His narrative really falls apart, and I cannot even guess whose lives he does and does not value, or why. He even makes an orc cook his fucking arm on the sun because he's having a moment to reflect. So do you or do you not care about the well-being of orcs? This was my Adar character exploration snuck into the orc section. I doubt there is any value in exploring him any further, as there is nothing more to him than being an inconsistent psychopath. So, those with keen observation skills might have noticed I talked about orcs getting cooked by sunlight. Yes, this is the case. It is not exactly consistent when this happens. There are scenes where bright light is shining on parts of them, but they do not care. There are scenes with a slight overcast, and they are hurting. Others with the same light levels, and they are fine. They also have protective gear that I guess does not work. Or does it? Fuck if I know. Either way, orcs are also terrible fighters. You might be noticing a pattern here. Well, I'm not completely honest. They have insane accuracy at times. Incredibly accurate here, here, and here. Can't hit slow-moving targets from a meter away here. Look at this motherfucker hooking the armor of Arondir from the back on the first try. Now watch him literally throw himself off the roof, then wait until the elf can defend himself to strike. This orc comes up from the tunnels to look for humans to enslave, without a weapon. This big guy has come to wage war on the peasants, without a weapon. This one is trying to hit a man lying on the ground through his weapon. When assaulting the tower, they walk in leader first. When assaulting the village, they go in a neat line instead of surrounding it or lighting houses on fire, where the second wave does surround the town, but they patiently wait for the first one to get wiped, and for the defenders to have a little celebration and the stupid realization scene we'll get to. Now, half of this is military incompetence, and another half is just plain old retardation. Let me bring up my strongest example. So this orc is looking for little blinker here. Never mind the fact that he cannot for some reason hear the loud splashing. Watch this. So, after letting go of the bucket, he uses his teleportation skill to get far enough from the well for Blinker to hide. He heard a shout, so there is definitely a person there. Oh no, where did he go? Ah, must have been the wind. And with that, he walks off. He also fails to hear this. Fuck me. Is there anything else to the orcs? Not really. We know they like Adar, but that's hardly surprising. He's their leader.
No stain sand to your planet. Cowardly for Adar, then. But not for you! For Adar.
They mourn their dead, but who doesn't?
Lovo Baljabuk. Bees.
They are very subservient and surprisingly dutiful. They are not slacking or refusing to work. Their dedication to their cause is commendable really, even if their methods are comically evil. They are also good at tunneling, I guess. It wasn't all made by slaves. Another deeply fascinating faction. Do they really want a home, or are they just following Adar out of respect? Do they like anything beyond killing? Do they have anything of their elven heritage left in them? Who makes their clothes and forges their weapons? Do they have any society? No idea. Their whole contribution to the show was fucking worthless, to be completely honest. Still not the worst there is. At least they were openly evil. Which brings us to the Harfoots. Insidious little bastards splurted on the screen with the grace of a shard. They are perhaps the best example for a dissonance between what the series thinks something is and what it is actually shown to be. While at first they seem innocent enough, I have come to the conclusion that they are Skaven in disguise. They secretly hate each other and would stab one another for a piece of food if they weren't so cowardly. This cowardice is the only reason they stick together, as they know they would die on their own. Now these are big claims, and so far I have done little to back them up. Since this is a fair and objective analysis, let's remedy the problem. So, Harfoots are rather skittish, preferring to hide from any potential danger or run from it in general, with some exceptions. This is perfectly reasonable. They are short, not particularly strong, have an awkward physiology that reduces their running speed, and have yet to adopt the use of weapons. We can see their general behavior in their very first scene, where they cover up their entire civilization so that a duo of hunters does not notice them, even though in reality the man wouldn't do them any harm. It's better to be safe, and it's best when a larger, stronger and more violent species is not even sure you exist.
Look like a badger. Maybe a fox.
More likely a Harfoot.
Harfoot?
Dangerous creatures they are.
You're making it up.
Their camouflage is also a nice touch. We even have a scene where they change it to fit a different biome. Their drab clothes and foliage blankets make them blend in seamlessly. That's all well and good, but you might be interested in how exactly they know of encroaching dangers. Where the first scene tells us they have scouts, or at the very least sentries, who notify the others via animal sounds. That's good, or rather would be, if it was more than window dressing. This guy is the only one standing guard that we see the entire series. Why? Well, it would have made a few plot-relevant moments awkward. You see, their story is intertwined with that of Meteor Man, who happens to land close to their caravan. If there were Harfoots actually observing the area, then Nori would have never been able to sneak out in secret several times, occasionally carrying lamps to meet with this guy. He also later on just wanders into the camp, so there is absolutely nothing stopping any man or beast from ambushing and destroying their entire society. For people trying to remain hidden, they are awfully liberal with the use of open flames and firefly lanterns. Oh yes, firefly lanterns. Now, which do you think is easier and more efficient? Employing something flammable like a piece of wood, a candle? Let's also throw in oil for good measure to make this a fair competition. Or capture and breed fireflies at such an industrial rate that you can fill dozens of lanterns with them and keep up with the ones that constantly die from starvation or exhaustion within said lanterns, even if for some reason these fireflies are much brighter than their real-life equivalents, produce light all night long and all year round, do not hibernate in the cold, reproduce very fast and spend very little time as a larva. Why would you even think to use them instead of fire? Fire that Harfoots use anyway. Their upkeep and care alone makes this a suboptimal practice, let alone the inefficiency of how many you need for a single lantern. You can even turn these on or off. They are lit at a slightly inconsistent level constantly. Why do you even need them? If you want to stay hidden, the moment the sun goes down you fuck off to your carts and hope to the Valar nothing finds the camp. Where the answer to the why is a meta one, as per usual. It is for this scene, so that Meteor Man can accidentally kill them and the show can pretend he might be Sauron a little more. The cracks are already beginning to show, but let's discuss something that is not bad first. Their book. This is an ancient tome filled with age-old wisdoms and predictions. It contains maps of constellations, pictograms, as well as some historical notes we'll get to. When I first saw what really is in the book, I was really surprised, but I warmed up to it quite a bit. After the first scene, Sadok takes a look in the book. He sees the outline of these antler-bearing humans, followed by wolves, very likely a result of many observations. The hunters are followed by animals that perhaps feasted on the remains of their prey. Maybe they are stalking them to attack if they get separated. There can be numerous reasons for why one occurrence is a consequence of the other. Sure enough, creatures they call wolves soon appear and do just what I proposed. Follow the caravan until they find a few separated little hobbitses and attack. Now, I have not really talked about creature design yet because there are very few monsters in the whole thing, and the wargs I have no comment on. The troll I have problems with, but these entelodonts are fine. Yeah, they are more like terror pigs than wolves, except for their feet. Instead of hooves or claws, they have this odd mix between the two, with the shape highlighted by the prints. Brilliant acting here, by the way. Entelodonts were both scavengers and predators, even if not pack animals, so they mostly fit the bill. I like them, and their design is fine. I know, there's not much material I can sink my teeth into here. Fucking trolls still manage to piss me off. But I digress. The book is also a nice addition, and fits well with the traditionalistic approach of the Harfoots. They don't exactly have the luxury to exchange information and ideas with the wider world, so they have to rely on what they themselves recorded. As for what else is in there, Harfoots are nomadic gatherers. They collect fruits, small animals, vegetables, whatever they can get their hands on, consume it, then move on to greener pastures. They do have some orchards and whatnot here and there, but these are not tended to, simply visited when the time is right for harvest. Their migration and destinations are also governed by the book, another piece of wisdom noted down by their predecessors, right next to the names of those they left to die.
And now, before we begin our next journey, we remember those from prior migrations who fell behind. And should any Harfoot fall behind this migration, they likewise will be carried with us in our hearts and in our memories.
Yes, if something happens to one of their own, an injury perhaps that would make them difficult to keep up, well, they just don't give a solitary fuck. They say they are sorry, but do not lift a finger to help. This saint of a man, possibly the only Harfoot with a pure heart, twists his ankle while preparing some building for a celebration. Nobody helps him, they just sit around, but he's selfless enough to try and do it on his own. He gets injured, so his entire family has an existential crisis, because their strongest member is now unable to pull the cart.
How bad is it? Can he migrate?
You saw him. Wouldn't put the weight of a leaf on that leg, much less pull a cart.
Mind your own fire, Mouther.
They are right to fear their fate. Even though there are more Harfoots than carts, not a single one of their supposed friends offers a hand. Let me remind you of their song.
Nobody goes off train. And nobody walks alone. Nobody goes off train. And nobody walks alone.
Even through this, he tries to remain positive and hopeful.
No, I'm fine. I slipped on wet grass is all. It's just a twist. There's nothing worse.
Bless him. What's more, for the audacity that his daughter had Meteor Man, a confused, harmless fella they don't even pay much attention to after the initial fright, they propose to decaravan them.
Our laws are clear. Any Harfoot that breaks them is to be decaravaned.
That means they are not allowed to come with the rest of them, which is a death sentence for a Harfoot, especially with wolves around. They only spare them from certain death because Nori is young.
Miss Brandyfoot is young, but there's much hair still to grow on her toes as sense between her ears. Tomorrow we depart as planned, and the Brandyfoot cart will be with us. At the back of the caravan. At the back. At the back.
They just send them to the back with an injured man and no help. So I guess they paid the lip service to not executing them.
You may as well have stamped our name in the book of the left behinds.
If it wasn't for Meteor Man, they would have died. There's no doubt about it. To make matters worse, they blame the poor sod for the fact that there is not enough to forage in one of the forests they pass through and propose to forcefully take away their wheels.
Never been this bare at this time of year. It's as plain as lip fungus. He's responsible, isn't he? The big fella.
What precisely do you expect me to do about it?
Take their wheels and leave them.
Again, this is the equivalent of saying you want to hang them for perceived sins you cannot prove. Don't try to hide behind innocent words. Also, this does not seem like slim pickings to me, you slimy, evil, lying piece of shit. Steering back this segment towards the book, the names of all those people they essentially lined up in front of a wall and shot for assumptions, basic decency, and getting injured are recorded with him.
Miles Brightapple, stuck in the snows of the mountain pass.
We wait for you.
Chance Proudfellow, Yarrow Proudfellow, Strap, Dewis, Linseed Proudfellow. Taken by landslide one rainy winter day.
We wait for you.
Now, this whole celebration, paired with the really nice looking costumes, and the rather solemn ceremony with commemorating their dead would actually be good. Would it really only be people that were buried by an avalanche or taken by wolves? The line, "We wait for you," would hold so much more emotional weight. I fucking loathe how something so close to greatness was utterly decimated by how they actually treat their people, how they condemn their own to die out of malice. Here's the thing. I'd even understand if they had to move on based on the book of predictions and had to leave those too ill, injured or old to make the travel, even if they were carried. It would be heartbreaking if they had to leave someone mauled half to death by a wild animal because they know he is already done for and there are not enough people to carry him. But no, they are simply evil without the show recognizing it. Also, this bit curb stomped the scene for me.
Lovo Baljabook. Bees. We all loved him, but he was an idiot.
Yeah, they are laughing at someone who was stung to death by bees. Or maybe he wasn't even killed by the stings, they just left him because he could not step on his feet or something. Fucking hell, the orcs show more respect and care for their wounded. I hate this so much. Is there anything else to note about these insidious fucks? Well, they are also rather stupid, to no one's surprise. For example, right after this bitch admits to being wrong about Meteor Man,
Brandyfoot girl was right to help him. Was right all along. And if you think Malva Meadowgrass is too proud to admit it, well...
Sedek says this.
You know, Malva, just once, it would be grand if you weren't right all the time.
I guess they kinda forgot in those 2 seconds she isn't always right. There is also one scene where their orchard got hit by the Mount Doom explosion. Well, not the whole thing, just some of it. They are picking the fruits that burned to a fucking crisp instead of the undamaged ones. Why? Why are you even touching those? You can't eat it. Also, in a later scene, Meteor Man tries to heal the trees in the clearing out of the goodness of his heart. This brainlet walks forward even though everyone is staying back, right when a branch is about to break. Then Nori bloody tackles her so that the branch falls on both of them. She wouldn't have even been hit. You could have put her back too, but you jump forward. What the actual fuck? Oh, by the way, this is the reason they decide to exile Meteor Man for his transgressions of helping a family keep up, saving a few Harfoots from the Enteledons, and trying his best to heal their orchard. Not that I expected anything else from the stupid and evil version of hobbits. There is one enigma though. There are a few cases of select Harfoots lending a bit of help to each other here and there, but this man is something different. Always positive, helping as much as he can, even at the risk of his health, loving his family above all, even trying to get things running again when their whole caravan burns down. Oh yeah, that's something that takes place, not in small part due to him being a true Chad. Unlike any other Harfoot would have done, when his daughter is threatened by these ladies, he does not hesitate to charge at them with a lit torch. Now, these are evil like your average Harfoot, so they burn their carts down as punishment. At least they did not kill them outright. By the way, the book survives this. I guess I haven't gone on a tangent in the last 5 minutes or so. Here I go ranting about fire. Fire in this universe is worthless. This fire gives no warmth because of how evil the place is.
This place is so evil our torches give off no warmth.
Now you would be right to ask how their internal heat isn't sapped away if fire cannot function, or how oxidation even happens with such intensity if there is no heat, but this is an evil that only affects fires, I guess. This fire does not burn either. This fire only destroys the ships with no damage done to people, even those at the epicenter. This fire does not burn the lady, and only burns non-plot relevant items. This inferno blown into the faces of these Harfoots does not even singe their eyebrows. This volcanic fucking blast only burns buildings, some unnamed characters, and this horse at this specific spot. Even their hair is intact. Do the showrunners know what fire is? Have they seen it, or at this point is that technology so obsolete they could grow up without ever coming into contact with flames? This makes my brain hurt. Also, while we are on this topic, let's discuss the
Trinity of Bitches.
Yeah, them. They are not really a faction, but calling them characters is an insult to writing. So, they are spellcasters who have come from Rune, coincidentally the place where Meteor Man has to go.
The stars. It is called the Hermit's Hat. A pattern visible in but one place. The lands of Rune.
It is definitely not an excuse so that they can mistake him for Sauron in a thinly veiled attempt at a red herring. What are you talking about?
Tulil men nuritas. Heru Sauron. He is not Sauron. He is the other. He is.
I'm good.
This one can control fire and does very weird faces and poses. She can also shapeshift and for some reason pranks Meteor Man when first approaching him instead of just introducing herself and the others.
Nori.
seriously, what was the point of pretending to be Nori? Did you intentionally wish to get off on the wrong foot? Or was this the only way you could clumsily set up the shapeshifting so that it does not come out of the blue in a later scene? Anyway, about the rest. This one can throw knives, but they have a lengthy cooldown. She also screams very awkwardly. This one has a plate with stars on it. How enticing.
Dust fears you.
They die. The end. Their entire contribution is to be a small speed bump for Meteorman and the Harfoots. Make him realize he's in fact not evil.
I'm good.
Despite the little fucks ostracizing him for every mistake anyone ever committed in his proximity. Even the destruction of their carts does not inconvenience the Harfoots more than a day. I guess they do kill Sedok. Scratch that, Sedok is running about and stabbing feet even after the knife to the gut. He's mostly fine, and Meteorman might even be able to heal him. No? You won't even ask?
Now, if you don't mind, I'd just like to sit a while. Watch the sun come up.
Oh, the sunrise? How long we had that? Oh, there it is. I guess Sedok is dead now. What a character. He was superstitious, cruel, malicious, cowardly, and responsible for untold deaths. At least he hesitated with the decision to execute Nori's family and gave directions to Meteorman when exiling him. Yes, he was one of the better ones. Spit on his grave for me, will you? That Sedok evaluation kinda snuck in there, but I don't really have anything else to say about the Trinity either. They were a whole lot of nothing. And with that, we have gone through all the races and factions in a jiffy. Since this part is the more world-building focused of the two, let me quickly fit in two more short little topics. Let's start with the one I teased before, and you were all anxiously waiting for. Agriculture. Now, the trailer has this line.
Elves have forests to protect. Dwarfs their mines, mend their fields of grain.
A horrible, horrible thing if true, as I've mentioned in my preliminary livestream all that time ago. How innocent I was back then. I thought this show had a chance of being bland and mediocre. Alright, stop your yammering, I'm getting to the horticultural stuff. So, as you probably all know, societies big and small need to eat. A stable food supply is a staple for any large nation, and growing crops paired with animal husbandry are essential for those aiming to be self-reliant. Men cannot have their fields of grain. That needs to be something almost universal. Elves, dwarves, even orcs need to get their food from somewhere, and planting some poaceae is an easy and efficient way to do it. There are of course many potential alternatives, but there must be something if a society is to function. Let's see which factions pass this test and which would starve normally. Harfoots are an easy choice to begin with. They are completely fine. Their numbers are comparatively small and their stature short. Not only would they require less nutrition than a human, they also have a handy recording of fertile regions and when they are ripe for harvest. They gather and migrate to keep their civilization fed, and while this limits their potential for growth, and a particularly bad year can lead to some level of starvation, they are perfectly fine from the perspective of realism. Númenor is another one we can more or less cross off as okay. While we do not see any fields or vineyards, we can assume there is place enough for them on the isle. We do have vine after all, so they must have some level of horticulture. As for meat, they have the sea.
And the sea is always right.
We know they fish, why would they not? And the vast ocean will keep their nation prosperous even at extreme population density. For the time being, anyway. Southlands are also fine. We know they have fields, animals, and plenty of food. They just don't have the brain cells to bring it with them when they move. Let's take a look at the less obvious ones. Dwarves. Now, there is greenery and light in their city. While space is not exactly used to its full potential, there are farms within the mountain. We see this small snippet of one growing some root vegetable. Naturally, this is not enough for the whole city. It could barely feed a single family all year round. Still, this shot suggests there are more. They would need a huge amount, even with particularly nutritious plants, so this is a bit of a lip service to the idea. Areas with the most light available should be filled to the brim with plots. Well, at least they seem to have animal husbandry. However, I find it strange they do not take them out to graze. That would surely lighten the load on their underground crops, as animals need quite a bit of feed, especially at that size. Ultimately, this is a case of they thought about it, just not too much. Disappointing, but at least there is something. Let's move on to the elves. Well, we do know they have forests with game, so that is something. Linden definitely does not have fields of grain, and this terrain is unfit for agroforestry too. So, do the noble elves gather their plant-based food by picking berries and digging up roots? Quite unbecoming of them, but this is not even a stable economy. Hunting and gathering might feed a small society, but a capital of immortal beings who mostly just increase in numbers? They must be keenly aware of the potential their forest has and never overconsume, else a death spiral will occur. I guess they do have the option to trade. Maybe the other cities and towns have extensive agriculture, just not Linden. It would be extremely inefficient, but might be the case. Let's see the other example, Region. Yeah, well, there is the sea.
And the sea is always right.
So, elves are either incredibly short-sighted and up for a rude awakening when their naturally occurring resources dwindle, or the writers did not think of how they sustain themselves thoroughly enough. Well, it's both, but one is the in-universe effect, while the other is the meta reason. So what about orcs? Well, as per usual, evil factions do not get the luxury of being developed, not to any appreciable degree. How they remained fed with such numbers prior to the kidnappings is beyond me. They have no crops or cattle, in fact their corruption kills both. They might eat their captives, but those were only available once they made their move, and is absolutely not a sustainable model. What's more, they completely fucked their habitat. There will be nothing growing under the perpetual volcanic clouds. Now, normally, a volcanic eruption would ultimately provide rather fertile ground. Once the clouds are gone and the soil cools, succession takes over. Plants of various developmental levels quickly recolonize the ashes, rock, and dead matter, facilitating the return of progressively more complex vegetation. However, for some reason, this magical water that magically caused the volcano to explode will magically maintain the constant flow of smoke and ash, while magically not causing another explosion. I hope the orcs like eating dirt and basalt. They do not even have the benefit of trade or fishing. There's nothing to fear really, because they just created the land where nothing could live. Not even them. And don't even bring up raiding. They clearly do not do that for food. They slaughtered animals and left all food untouched. Brilliant world building. On the topic of brilliant world building, I'd also like to briefly touch on these trees. Now, I know they are Tolkien lore, but here are two things. First, they made the conscious decision to depict them like this, which poses some problems. Secondly, originating from Tolkien does not automatically mean good, or that it should be taken literally. I suspect both of the latter statements are quite controversial, so let me deal with the show's depiction first. These are shit substitutes for the sun. They are not bright enough to give off any more than an afternoon light at this distance. What about Middle-earth? Is that place completely dark and dead? There is no life without primary producers, and there are no plants without light. Chemosynthesis is an option, but that means Middle-earth was a volcanic hellscape with alien life. Still, even on Valinor, that's a few hundred square kilometers of light at best. Why are they not brighter? They are supposed to light the entire world. Are they not? Not that any of this is consistent. They are in more light when doing their shitty conversation than when they go over the little mound here. Now, this is an era of extremely high fantasy, where anything can be explained with "it's just magic." Literally everything can be sustained solely by magic, which would make the gods pretty stupid and vain, forcing their image onto the world within the rule sets they created, even though the two do not fit together. I also find it odd how the only sources of light, the trees, are gone, yet there is still a level of ambient light so that we can see stuff. I imagine most of life would have died out during that unknown time without the trees or a sun.
Where is my son?
This ancient history clashes so hard with the tone of later events, which seem to take place in a more grounded world. Which brings me to a point, something I have mentioned a few times but seldom detailed: the interpretation of Tolkien. Yeah, I know I said I would not bring up the source material, but this is relevant, trust me. So, as it has been said countless times, the professor set out to create a mythology. Mythologies often start out with a creation story, with grand cosmic events of gods and abstract concepts, mountains created of dead giants, gods getting impregnated by horses, really out there stuff. The early stages are obviously tales with barely any relation to reality. Then, as the story moves forward, they start reeling in the plot lines with more relatable characters and events until it reaches little more than exaggerated history. I believe that Middle-earth also conforms to this trajectory. The events of the first stage are but a mythological background, over-exaggerated, hardly anything to be taken literally. I mean, otherwise we'd have to contend with an actual flat celestial body transitioning to a globe and a completely geocentric universe which are, well, they are not exactly light topics with no potentially world-breaking problems. I also personally believe it is silly if literal, regardless of who wrote it. Still, for better or for worse, this show took everything as facts rather than an unreliable narrative. Now, few Tolkien fans would be happy with my interpretation, and probably no purist would ever consider it a real possibility, but having such a grounded setting with mostly good world building, where the Lord of the Rings takes place, be preceded by something so outlandish just does not gel with me. Still, just an opinion, one supported by the importance of verisimilitude and investment. Now that I have probably upset a lot of people, I think it is time to end this first part. I've been talking for quite a long time and we have barely touched characters. And there are some real gems, believe you me. If you watched the entire video, wow! Thank you. You have no idea how much this means to me. While I prepare the second part, which should come much sooner than this one as the script is halfway done, come and hang out in my Discord server. I don't make any money off of these videos, and since this is a hobby, I don't need to or mind. However, I'm always looking to expand my resources and equipment, so if you feel like this brief little video was worthwhile and you'd like to support my future endeavors, I do have a Patreon. It has a few perks and rewards associated with it, so check it out if you feel like it. You can find links to all of these places in the description. Alright, I've rambled on for long enough. I hope to see you in the next part. Bye!